One fact for every Cantonian Pokemon in reverse, starting with the clone known as Mewtwo all the way down to everyone's favorite little starter. Starting with Mewtwo itself, who's depicted as the only member of its species being a clone of Mew. However, in both the anime and manga, it is implied that multiple Mewtwo have been created. Dragonite is the only species owned by one of Ash's friends, Iris, that Ash himself would later catch. In Pokemon Yellow, Dragonair's catch rate was changed from 45 to 27, making it the hardest Pokemon to catch in the Kanto Safari Zone. Its catch rate was then changed back to 45 in later games. In both Generation 1 and 2, Dratini and its evolution Dragonair could learn the move Hyper Beam via leveling up. However, they couldn't learn it via TM. This was due to a bug that was later fixed in Ruby and Sapphire. According to a trainer in the Cinnabar Gym, Moltres is the reason why Gym Leader Blaine became a Fire-type expert in the first place. Definitely doesn't have anything to do with that volcano about 10 feet away. Out of all the legendary Pokemon with fixed in-game locations, Zapdos is the only one that can be obtained with as little as 1 or 2 badges. Up until Gen 7, Articuno was the only Pokemon that could learn the moves Mind Reader and Sheer Cold, which made for a nasty combo. Snorlax's Pokedex color is listed as black, which also makes it the only black Pokemon introduced in Generation 1. Aerodactyl is the only Generation 1 Rock-type Pokemon to not possess a ×4 weakness to Grass-type moves. Kabutops was originally known as Lantis in the beta versions of Red and Blue. This name was derived from Atlantis, and Kabuto also had a different name, originally being known as At, which was also derived from Atlantis? I mean, now I'm kind of glad they didn't go with those names, to be honest. Looks like Amistar also had a different name, originally being known as Cargo with a K, inspired by the French word for snail. And Ammonite's Pokedex number is a reference to the Golden Spiral, aka the Fibonacci sequence Golden Angle, which is 137.5 degrees. Oregon is the only Pokemon to have its category changed in Japan, going from the CG Pokemon to the Virtual Pokemon. Flareon is the only evolution with a type advantage against more than one other evolution, which I guess makes it the best one. Jolteon's needle-like fur helps it conduct and control its lightning output, so pet responsibly. Vaporeon
Stop it. Get some help.
Vaporeon is the only water-type Pokemon that appears in the field section of Pal Park. And Eevee is the only Pokemon that evolves into an evolution that does not share its original typing. But that's probably because it's also the only Pokemon with the most possible evolutions in the whole franchise. Ditto is the only Generation 1 Pokemon to not have an evolution or alternate form, be it a regional, mega, or even Gigantamax form. Bet you didn't know that. And Lapras is the only Ice-type Pokemon to have a Gigantamax form. Despite being part flying type, Gyarados couldn't learn any flying type moves naturally prior to Gen 7, and Magikarp has the lowest base attack stat of all water type Pokemon. Poor little guy. Tauros is the only Pokemon to have more than one regional form within the same region. In Paldea, Tauros have 3 forms. Pinsir's obsession with the color green in the anime episode titled Showdown at Dark City is a reference to Pinsir being a version exclusive for the original Pokemon Green. Magmar was just recently featured in the episode 10 of Beyond the Pokedex, a monthly web series created by the Pokemon Company themselves. You should definitely check them out. And Electabuzz is the only member of its species line to not have some physical relation to an AC power unit. I mean, Elekid's head being the shape of a power plug and Electivire's back pattern looking like a power socket? Yeah, way to stand out, bud. Jynx is the only Pokemon to have dry skin as its hidden ability, and Scyther is the only Pokemon with split evolutions to have had both its evolutions introduced after its debut. Mr. Mime is the only Pokemon in Legends Arceus that can prevent players from battling it, as the barrier it sets up disrupts any Pokeballs that hit it, and Starmie is the only Psychic-type Pokemon in the Water 3 egg group. In Pokemon Rangers, Staryu is the only Pokemon with the field move Flash. And in the Red and Blue betas, Seeking's prototype name was Neptune, which honestly goes pretty hard. And even though Goldeen uses Splash in all 5 Super Smash Bros. Games as well as Pokemon Quest, it has no way of learning that move in any Pokemon game. Deidre is the only Pokemon that has the Poison Point ability without being a poison type itself, and Horsey's original artwork in Red and Blue is depicted with 2 fins instead of 1. Kangaskhan is a Pokemon with a 100% female gender ratio, however, its Pokedex entries suggest that there may in fact be male Kangaskhan out there, maybe some sort of regional variants. In the red and blue betas, Angela were originally known as Meduse, which is derived from the character Medusa. I kinda wish they kept it. Fancy's HP is the highest base stat to base stat total ratio, with its 250 HP stat making up 55.6% of its base stat total. Don't worry though, it's still tied with Happiny as having the lowest base stat attack and defense stats of all Pokemon. Ken Sugimori has confirmed that Rhydon was in fact the first Pokemon ever created, design-wise of course, with the early sketches of the Capsule Monster games featuring Rhydon, Lapras, and a few others. The Pokedex of many earlier generations stated that Rhyhorn have powerful tackles, however Rhyhorn was unable to learn tackle until Generation 8, making the Pokedex all cap. In the Gen 4 Sinnoh games, the Pokedex entries for Weezing claim triplet forms have been discovered, but this variant of Weezing has not been shown in any Pokemon media as of yet. Coughing was originally known as NY, being a reference to New York City's polluted air. Oof, shots fired. And despite its name, category, and Pokedex entries, Lickitung could not learn the move Lick until Gen 2. Hitmonchan learns the most increased priority moves by leveling up out of all Pokemon with 6 prio moves total, and Hitmonlee has the most former signature moves than any other Pokemon with a total of 4. Marowak was originally known as Guardia, Spanish word for guardian, and Cubone is the only Pokemon that can evolve into a dual-type Pokemon that doesn't share any of its types with its evolution. Exeggutor is the only Pokemon in the Pokemon Scarlet and Violet to have both its original and regional forms appear in the same Pokedex, with both forms appearing in the Blueberry Pokedex. And despite being consisted of 6 individuals from different births and having separate identities, all 6 Exeggcute eggs merge during evolution to form a singular Exeggutor. In Pokemon Red, Blue, Fire Red, and Leaf Green, Electrode is the lowest leveled fully evolved Pokemon that can be obtained in these games, being obtained at level 3. This is by catching a Pikachu in Viridian Forest and trading it to an old man at Cinnabar Island's Pokemon Lab. Voltorb has the lowest base stat of all electric type Pokemon, no wonder why they blow themselves up, and many Pokedex entries mention that Kingler's claws have a crushing power of 10,000 horsepower, which is just factually incorrect, since horsepower is a unit of power which is energy divided by time, not related to pressure in any way. A more correct unit of measurement would be pounds per square inch. Even though it's a river crab, its Pokedex entries state that Krabby live on sandy beaches, so maybe they should be known as beach crabs? Hypno is the only notable Pokemon to most likely be left-handed, since they're always holding their pendulums in their left hands. And despite being heavily associated with Dream Eater, Drowsy and its evolution cannot legally learn Dream Eater outside of the Let's Go Pokemon games. The Onix line is the only multi-stage evolutionary line, which can be completely acquired with in-game trades. However, this is only possible in Pokemon Heart Gold and Soul Silver, in which the player can trade a Bellsprout for Onix in Violet City, and any Pokemon for Steelix in Olivine City. Despite Gengar and its species line all being part Poison type, none of them were able to learn any Poison type moves by leveling up until Pokemon Let's Go. Haunter is the only Ghost type Pokemon featured in the original Pokemon Snap, and Ghastly is the only Pokemon that weighs exactly the same as its evolution. Cloyster is tied with Mega Slowbro for the highest base defense stat out of all the Water-type Pokemon, and Shelder were revealed to be capable of floating through the air in Pokemon Snap, a trait that has never been seen in any other media. Muck shares similar traits with Weezing and Garbodor, all 3 Pokemon being pure Poison-type Pokemon, with a single pre-evolved form, roughly the same base stat totals, and evolution lines that appear to be based off of different kinds of pollution, Muck being water pollution. In Grimer's anime debut, Grimer had a very strong odor that made most people around the Grimer cover their noses from its smell. However, in later episodes, Grimer's smell has seemingly ceased to exist. This is most obvious when Dawn is given a Grimer to train, and it immediately hugs her, but no one complains about its smell. Probably because it was covered in Axe body odor. In the Pokemon Red and Blue beta, Dugong was originally known as Manatee. God, what a horrible name. And Seal's the only non-ice type Pokemon that can have Ice Body as its ability. Consequently, Seal's the only Pokemon with Ice Body to benefit from its Hail immunity, since all other Pokemon with the ability are naturally immune to hail damage due to their typing prior to Gen 9. According to its Pokedex entries, Dodrio can run at nearly 40 miles per hour. However, Doduo runs at 60 miles per hour, which means Doduo is faster, except Dodrio's base speed stats are higher. Before Gen 4, the necks of normal Doduo were black, which later became the male neck color pattern, while the Dodrio's necks were beige, which also later became the female neck pattern. Farfetch'd is the only Pokemon with a base stat total of 377 prior to the attack increase it received in Pokemon X and Y. It was instead the only Pokemon with a base stat total of 352. Magneton is the only electric-type Pokemon consisting of multiple bodies, and despite most of Magnemite's Pokedex entries saying that they are able to float through the air by employing powerful electromagnetic waves or even anti-gravity, Magnemite does not have the ability to levitate, even though I'm pretty sure we all remember it having it. Slowbro's Pokedex entries state that if the shelter is removed from its tail, it will revert back to Slowpoke, which is a rare example of de-evolution being mentioned in the games. Slowpoke has the lowest base speed stat out of all Psychic-type Pokemon. Rapidash is the favorite Pokemon of the Kanto Pokemon fan club chairman, which is a reference to the big hit phenomena of My Little Pony back in the 90s. Onita's Stadium and Fire Red Pokedex entries state that it can jump over the Eiffel Tower, which exists in the real world. So I guess Pokemon is based in the real world? Between red, blue, and yellow versions, Golem is the only Pokemon that cannot ever be seen without trading. However, its existence is implied by an NPC who had just received his friend's Graveler. Graveler's red and blue sprite shows an incorrect number of limbs. Only 4 are visible. This was later corrected in Pokemon Yellow. Geodude's evolutionary line is the only 3-stage evolutionary line in which all members have a regional form. Even though many of Tentacruel's Pokedex entries mention it having 80 tentacles, it is never shown to have that many, with its main artwork only showing up to like 14 of them. In the red and blue beta, Tentacruel was originally known as Jilly, which is hilarious. And despite learning Leech Life through breeding, Victreebel can't actually learn this via TMs in Pokemon Sun and Moon and Ultra Sun and Moon. Now here's a personal one. Weeping Bell gave me nightmares growing up. Must be because of those soulless eyes. Bellsprout is tied with Sunkern and Seedot for the lowest base special defense stat of all grass type Pokemon. And in the red blue beta, Machamp was originally known as Judo, name that is a play off of Judo, the fighting style. Machoke's belt looks very similar to the winner's belt prop in Pokemon Black and White, and before the release of the English versions of Red and Blue, Machop was also known as Karate, a play off of Karate, the fighting style. Alakazam was the only Pokemon whose base stat total does not increase by exactly 100 points upon Mega Evolution, gaining instead only 90 points overall. This only applied to it in Gen 6 because Mega Alakazam received another 10 points in its special defense in Gen 7. If a Kadabra holds an Everstone from Gen 3 onwards while traded, the Everstone will not take effect and Kadabra would still evolve into Alakazam. While it shares this trait with Machoke, Graveler, and Haunter in Generation 3 due to a glitch, Kadabra keeps this trait in Generation 4 onwards. Abra has the highest flee rate in Pokemon Go at 99%, meaning it is almost guaranteed to run away after breaking out a Pokeball. Talk about pain. In some illustrations, Poliwrath is depicted with 4 fingers instead of 3. What? Oh, I guess so. The logo for the Pokemon Center in Tokyo featured Poliwhirl until it was replaced by Piplup in July 2007. Prior to Gen 6, Poliwag and Ditto had the same cry. Despite the Pokemon category name, Arcanine is not actually a legendary Pokemon. It is the only Pokemon species to have legendary Pokemon as its Pokemon category, however. And also, why is it on this hunk of rock with the other 3 legendary birds? I mean, I could see why you would think it's a legendary Pokemon. Through a glitch in the Gen 1 Pokemon games, Pokemon that would normally require an evolution stone to evolve can be evolved without it, provided that that Pokemon levels up in a battle and the player has sent out a specific Pokemon in that same battle. In the case of a Thunderstone, specific Pokemon was Growlithe. Such a good boy. According to the Pocket Monsters animation, Primeape is the reason why Pokeballs were developed in the first place. At the Hihiya City Game Freak office in Pokemon Sun and Moon, Morimoto states that he designed Mankey according to his boss's instructions. Golduck, despite knowing an array of Psychic-type moves, is not actually a Psychic-type Pokemon like many of the players were led to believe. In Pokemon Scarlet and Violet, Psyduck is programmed to learn Simple Beam through breeding, but no Pokemon in those games can learn Simple Beam, making the move unobtainable until Pokemon Home was updated. Urchin's number in the National Pokedex and the Alolan Pokedex for Pokemon Ultra Sun and Moon are the exact same, at 53. Meowth is the only Pokemon to have both a regional form and Gigantamax form. Despite being described as 3 Diglett, their official weight is listed as being well over the weight of 3 Diglett. Diglett and Alolan Diglett have the lowest base HP and defense stats of all ground-type Pokemon. In early official art, Venomoth had yellow spots on the back of its wings. This was removed when later official artwork was released. Venonat and its evolution, Pokemon that went through the longest without appearing in the regional Pokedex, excluding their appearances in Remix. Prior to the release of Pokemon Scarlet and Violet, their last appearance in a regional Pokedex was in Crystal, almost 22 years. Jeez. Parasect's Pokedex entry for Pokemon Stadium connects the Pokemon world with the real world, noting that its spores are sometimes used as medicine in China. Oh. In Generation 1, Poison-type attacks were super effective against Bug-type Pokemon, making Paras and Parasect the only Pokemon to have ever had 3 times 4 weaknesses. Although Vileplume has the Chlorophyll ability, the Rafflesia genus of plants that it is based on do not actually contain chlorophyll. Gloom is the only dual-type Pokemon that can evolve into a single-typed Pokemon, and Oddish is the only poison type whose body consists only of a head and legs. No other Pokemon has the same type combination as Golbat and its evolutionary line, and due to the lack of eyes, Zubat is the only Pokemon whose alpha form in Legends Arceus does not bear any glowing red eyes, which is kind of funny. It's just a big Zubat. Wigglytuff has the highest base HP stat of all Fairy-type Pokemon, and due to an oversight, Jigglypuff appears purple instead of pink in the battle against Gengar in the intro of Pokemon Blue. Ninetales' name is misspelled as Ninetales in the Pokemon trading card game for the Game Boy Color, and in some pre-release material, which is probably why most of us remember it being spelled that way in the first place. Vulpix has the lowest base HP of all Fire-type Pokemon, and Clefable in its pre-evolved form share their category with Snubbull and Gramble. They're all known as the Fairy-type Pokemon, which is probably why they ended up getting the Fairy typing later. The Pokédoll is a Clefairy doll as identified by the Japanese name of its item, PP doll. Although its female counterpart Nidoqueen cannot be bred, Nidoking can. Nidorino is one of the first 2 Pokemon to appear in a Pokemon battle both in the anime and in the Pokemon games, with the other being Gengar. And despite the addition of genders in all Pokemon starting in Generation 2, the 2 variations of Nidoran remain separate species, rather than a singular species with split evolution chains. In the Japanese games Red and Green, Nidoqueen weighs 6 kg instead of 60, as it does in all other Pokemon games. This has no real mechanical significance, as no game mechanics use weight in Pokemon Red and Green, but it's still kind of funny. Nidorina's shiny coloration is similar to Nidorino's regular coloration and vice versa, and Nidoran female is the only Pokemon that loses the ability to breed upon evolution. In Pokemon Red and Blue Beta, Sandslash's original name was Sandstorm, and both Sandshrew and Alolan Sandshrew have abilities that boost evasion in certain weather. Sandstorm for Sandshrew and Hail for Alolan Sandshrew. Raichu is the most common Pokemon found amongst rivals, being used by 5 of them, and Pikachu is currently represented in the trading card game by more cards than any other Pokemon, with 211 unique cards. I mean, it's not the mascot for nothing. Arbok's face-like pattern differs between games, with some having a derpy look while others having a more menacing gaze. And in the early official art of Ekans, all of the bands on its body were colored yellow instead of just one on its neck. This was then later changed down the line. Barrow is the only Pokemon with a base stat total of 442, and Spearow is in a 6-way tie with other flying-type Pokemon for having the lowest base defense of all flying types. Raticate is the only Pokemon that shares its national Pokedex number with the level which it evolves from its pre-evolved form, which is kinda cool. And Rattata has the lowest base HP out of all normal type Pokemon. When rematching gym leaders in Heart Gold, Soul Silver, both Falkner and Blue have Pidgeot as their highest leveled Pokemon. Coincidentally, Falkner is the first gym leader while Blue is the last. Pidgeotto is the only Pokemon to have a base stat total of 349, and Pidgey has the shortest cry out of any Pokemon, being only 0.181 seconds long. Now that's short. In Pokemon Conquest, Beedrill is the only Pokemon that is featured without its evolutionary relatives, and Kakuna has the lowest base attack stat out of all Poison-type Pokemon. And until Pokemon Platinum, Weedle was completely incapable of dealing damage to Steel-type Pokemon outside of Struggle, because it could only learn Poison Sting, to which Steel types are immune. But thankfully, from Platinum onward, Weedle could learn Bug Bite, because that surely was helpful. Butterfree was the first Pokemon shown in the Pokemon series with an alternate color, pink in its case. This has only been seen in a single female, and unlike a shiny Butterfree, which has green eyes and pink wings, limbs, and a snout, this Butterfree only differed in its pink body and wings. Metapod is the first Pokemon to evolve in a movie, and part of the first evolution cycle in a Pokemon episode. And Caterpie was both the first Pokemon to be caught, and the first Pokemon to ever evolve in the Pokemon series. The way Blastoise flies in the new Pokemon Snap game is a potential reference to Gamera. And even though Wartortle's ears are depicted lighter than its face in the official Sugimori stock art, and most of the game sprites, early promotional pictures portrayed its ears as the same color as its face. There was also a scene in the 2004 film, Godzilla Final Wars, where a boy throws an action figure of Squirtle into the fire and insults it, making Squirtle the first Pokemon to ever appear in a Godzilla movie. Charizard is the most common Pokemon found amongst champions, being used by 4 of them, and in Gen 9 Charmeleon and its evolved form are unable to learn Metal Claw via TM, but its pre-evolved form Charmander can. Charmander is depicted with an inconsistent number of fingers in its designs across many generations, with some depicting 3 and others showing 4. And due to a censor that prevents Pokemon with offensive nicknames from being traded on the GTS, a Venusaur with an English name could not be traded on the GTS without a nickname in Generation 5. Ivysaur is the only second stage form grass poison Pokemon that does not require an evolution stone to reach its final form. And Bulbasaur is the only starter Pokemon to have a dual typing, being poison. And here's a bonus for everyone who stuck around to the end. The mythical Pokemon Mew is the only Pokemon out of the first 151 to be left out of the original version of the Pokerap, which is criminal, I tell ya. Maybe we should fix that. Hey, thanks for watching. If you like that, then you should totally check out this video here next. Trust me, you won't be disappointed.